Afternoon, everyone. Wanted to share a couple thoughts from conversations I've had earlier, but even yesterday. And we had some this morning even. Wanted to share a couple thoughts on culture, but probably not in the way we're thinking. Culture. So as an intro, what is probably the greatest export that the United States and maybe even the Western world has? I'm going to suggest culture. Culture. Why does everybody in the world want to listen to American music or Western music or whatever it is? Culture. Culture. So I wanted to take a minute or two. Let's look at this in connection. The objective was to not be recorded properly, but it's okay. Okay.
Also, be heard.
I was trying to go against that, but okay, all right. So let's look at Daniel chapter 1. And Maui, could you read for me Daniel chapter 1, verse 8? Daniel chapter 1, verse 8.
Daniel proposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself.
Thank you. Thank you. And I guess since we're being recorded, I'll read it again. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. So let's give a little background to Daniel. So Daniel is possibly a teenager here. He has been captured by Nebuchadnezzar, taken from his homeland, right? He's taken from his homeland. He's taken to Babylon. And Nebuchadnezzar's decided that he wants to train up these captives in his culture. In his culture, right? Now, Daniel was very likely a very rich and noble person, or came from a lineage of wealth and nobility. And obviously we know of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as well. But they were brought from Israel, and they were taken to Babylon. And so they're confronted with the first test that we read here. They're confronted with the first test in that they are asked to eat of the meat and the drink that the king has to offer during this time when they're supposed to be fattened up, they're supposed to be culturally exposed to the world of the Babylonians, and they're supposed to be trained up in the ways of the king in the palace. So, Daniel, and I like the first part here, Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat. So, did Daniel say, I cannot eat this meat? I mean, he might have told the eunuch, the prince of the eunuchs, that. But did Daniel say, I cannot eat this meat, I cannot drink this drink? Did he say, I cannot eat this meat, I cannot eat this drink because my culture says I cannot? Is that what he said here? No, it's not what he said. He said he purposed in his heart, so this purpose, right? He purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself. Okay? He purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself. It speaks to a greater depth of understanding of what's going on. Okay? So, from a cultural standpoint, Daniel has been taken away from everything that he had. Right? His parents may be dead, I don't know, right? And he's got a couple other friends that maybe he knew before, but he certainly knows them now. But he's basically engrossed in a new culture, in a new way of life. And it is a very easy thing for him to say, especially because he's young, teenager, okay, cool. Meat looks good, drink looks good, let's have at it. Very easy thing for him to say. He also maybe could have said, well, I can't do that because my culture says otherwise. It's something we love to hear today. I don't do that because my culture says otherwise. Probably wouldn't have gone over too well. But maybe that's another thing he could have said. But what we read is that he said he purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat. Didn't worry about culture, right? He understood what it was about what he was to engage in that was defiling to him, right? He understood why. He understood the reason why. So I'd like to just build on these verses as we look and explore a little bit about the culture around us. So I've had some conversations in the past couple days with some others. So I'd like to suggest the West is a great exporter of culture worldwide. Really is. Like I said, probably music, entertainment. Everybody watches Hollywood movies. Where are they made? They're made in the West, right? Music, same kind of thing. I'm not saying this is good or bad, it just is what it is. But the key here, though, is now focusing on kind of the different cultures that are out there. And I'm not going to try to break down cultures or anything like this. What I want to try to do is examine maybe there's something more than culture. I think we know this, but let's really look at it. So, the West had been a very Christian-centric culture, right? Whether it's the Catholic Church or Protestantism is very heavy in Europe, and that emigrated over to the U.S. and Canada and whatnot when there was, the Mayflower and things like this as people came to North America. And certainly even down in South America, you have a lot of Catholic. Okay. So, but the West, let's look at, U.S., North America, Europe, whatever it may be. So there was a culture that was very centered on Christ from a cultural standpoint. Okay? So we looked at this in relationship to, yesterday I was talking about this in relationship to marriage with a friend. And we were talking about the aspect of why divorce is so high right now, right? Why there's so many people getting divorced, even so many people not even getting married, right? But why divorce is so high. Why is that in the West, right? It's in the West. So the West has a very high divorce rate. Whereas if you take some more, we could say, old world cultures, just as a phrase, maybe the divorce rates aren't so high. Maybe in the Arabic culture, the divorce rate isn't so high. I don't know, maybe in the Ethiopian culture, the divorce rate isn't so high, or wherever it may be, right? But in the West, it's very high. It's very high. Why? Because we've lost the purpose of marriage. We don't know why marriage is, okay? And here's the key. 70 years ago, it wasn't as high in the West. It wasn't as high in the West 70 years ago. But why? Was it because people understood why they should be married? Was it because people understood Christ? No, because it was just the culture did not permit you to get divorced in the West, right? In the 50s, right? It just wasn't permitted. It happened, but it wasn't permitted, right? Now we move to the point where everything's permitted. Living together is permitted. Getting divorced is permitted. All the LGBT color agenda stuff is permitted, right? It's all permitted, right? That's what the culture says. That's what the culture wants. So one of the interesting things, I think, is if we come from a culture that does not permit these things, and we come into the West, we're going to be inundated with a new culture. Kind of like Daniel here, right? Kind of like Daniel, okay? And I would suggest that the Western culture is very, very, very powerful. And that's the point I was making about it. It seems to be a greatest export of the West into the rest of the world. It's a very powerful culture. And I would also suggest that culture cannot hold you against the Western culture. Your base culture, wherever you come from, the way you were raised, cannot hold you against the onslaught of Western culture. I really do not believe that. It is a very powerful force. There's probably a lot of evil there too, but it's a very powerful force, a very powerful force. Because a lot of people say, well, this is my culture, I do my thing, this is your culture, you do their thing, and everybody lives honky-dory. The question is then what happens in the second generation? What happens in the third generation, right? What happens? So what I'd like to just take just another moment or two, and hopefully some others can share some thoughts, is I'd like to say culture cannot be why we do the things that we do. We cannot do the things we do because we were raised that way, because people say that's a good thing. Now, I'm talking about morality. If you want to enjoy some foods or whatever. But morality, right? It cannot be because we were raised that way. Well, I do this because that's, in our culture, we don't get divorced. This doesn't mean anything, because the West was there 70 years ago. In our culture, we don't get divorced, right? In the 50s. Oh, that woman down the street, now she's a divorcee, stay away from her, right? That's what it was 70 years ago. It's not the way it is today, right? There's been a progression. But even then, while people said we don't get divorced, they didn't know why. Because we'd already abandoned the reason, right? And the reason now is exactly like Daniel here, it's Christ. Okay? There's a reason. There's an actual reason. It's our salvation. It's our walk in relationship to Christ. It's the life that we're supposed to have in relationship to Him, right? So I live my life the way that I live it based upon Christ, not based upon my culture, right? And if the two come at odds, it should be Christ that is the one who's guiding the life that I live. Just like Daniel here, purposed in his heart. He purposed in his heart, so he took a position and he stayed with it, right? That he would not defile himself. He saw the other aspects of the culture around him as something that would defile him, right? Not just something different, not just something, well, I do it this way, you do it that way, let's all just do whatever we want to do. No, he saw the other things as something that would defile him. So when we make the decisions that we're going to make in our lives, and we especially, because I know there's a lot of folks here coming from all kinds of different cultures and whatnot and backgrounds, but we are gathered here in the West today, right? So we see all the influence of whatever it is, and just this is where we are today, and we see these influences around us. I'd like to suggest that we really want to take hold of the struggles that Daniel had to go through, the struggles that Daniel purposed in his heart to not forget the way that he was raised, not because it was the way that he was raised, but he understood the truth that was in it. So finding that truth that is in the way that we've been raised here, the way that we've grown up here in these assemblies, right? The way that we've come to understand Christ through our parents, whatever it may be. But ultimately, He is the answer. He is the reason why. I would also like to suggest that as the culture decays around us, I think we clearly see that, certainly here. I can't speak for other places in the world, but certainly here, as the culture decays around us, let's not get sucked into a trap when we're talking to other people, talking about marriage, for instance. Well, you should get married. It's better to have kids in marriage. Well, it is better to have kids in marriage, right? It's better to have kids in a marriage than to have kids if you're not married. It is better. But that's not a real reason. Give them the real reason, right? Because the superficial facade of culture has been removed. The West doesn't want anything to do with it, right? They don't want it. So fine. Let's give in our response to others when we're talking. Let's give them, we should be married because that's what Christ has done for His church. We're a symbol of Christ's love for His church, right? Let's give it. How many of us are actually willing in a conversation with someone when we're talking about marriage to say, who's not a believer, to say that? I'll challenge myself. That's a really difficult thing to do because it's a foreign concept, right? It really is. But let that be the reason why. And whatever the grounds are, whatever it is, let that be the reason we are expounding the things that we are expounding. You should live, not so much that you should live a certain way, because we do know that lifestyle is, in a sense, inconsequential if we don't have Christ first. And I think that's really the key here. Let us put Christ first. Let Him be the guidance and the direction for our path, for the purpose of salvation, the guidance and direction for our path, and ultimately, lifestyle will flow out of that. A Christian culture will flow out of that, as opposed to trying to impose or impress on a culture without the meaning and the truth behind it. So I just appreciate you, Maui. Thank you for reading that verse for us, and I hope that is of benefit to us. Thank you.
I'll stay in the same book, and I'll just continue. The thought here, sorry, mic's in my face. I'm not much for the camera nor the mic. In Daniel, and interesting thoughts that were brought out by our brother Jason, and really, when you think about, you used the word culture, but it's also the the stance that we take, but it's really putting ourselves in a position where we don't go to the world. See, we always want to go to the world. We always want to go to the culture or the system or whatever it is, because it entices us. It glitters, it shines, it looks cool, it's neat, it seems popular, it seems in. And sometimes the things of God don't seem like that. They seem, not so enticing or whatever, but it's because it's a general populace, right, idea, right? There's a, let's face it, we, in our lives, we go out, and in our work, how many in our work are believers and are Christians? How many, that we walk up and down the store and go in the mall, how many of them are believers, right? We're sort of outweighed, right, by the world and its system, and the world and its culture, or the world in its way. But I think it's beautiful, and I want to read this for the young folk, especially here, and younger than me, because I'm over 60, so I'm an old man. So I'm talking about young adults and teenagers and such. Well, I want to go to verse 17. It says, "And for these 4 children," it's interesting. They were Jason alluded to. They're in their teens, right? They're young people, and it says, "For these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skills and all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in the visions and dreams. Now, at the end of the days that the king had said he should bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar." And it says, "And the king communed with them." Take note of the words, the word scripture. The king communed with them. The world came, and the biggest ruler and the mightiest king, the most powerful man, he didn't go to the world. He went to these 4 kids. He wanted to commune. He wanted to have interaction with them. They stood their ground with God. Because to tell you the truth, they weren't looking for anything special. They weren't looking to be, as it were, patted on the back or be superstars or popular. They stood on God's side. We should stand with Christ. The world is doomed for destruction. Stand where you stand firm. Stand with Christ. Let the world do what it's going to do. And when the world realizes the wisdom, we're going to have a family camp about wisdom. So these verses I've read through Jason several times in the last couple, recently in the last month or so. But wisdom is with God. Wisdom, spiritual wisdom, is not with the world. And so the king comes to them. And he wants to interact with these 4 young people. And I think that's really neat. Because those 4 young people did not go to the world to find their resources and find their help and find their ideas and where they fit in and how they should be. No. they went to God. That's where we should go. And so it says the king communed with them, and among them all was found, not like Daniel and Hananiah and Mishael and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king, and in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astronomers that were all in the realm. And so it says that they were 10 times better. So there was no comparison. When Nebuchadnezzar the king looked at the things that they had that were quality, not quantity, quality. You can have all the money, you can have all the houses, you can have whatever you want, but the quantity doesn't make you, it's the quality that makes you. And that quality starts with Christ. And it's because that quality is not what you've made it, but what he's done. What he has done. It's based on him. And when we focus on him, then that comes through us. And we can express that quality of love and knowledge, wisdom that comes from above and isn't come from down here. Because the ruler of this world is Satan. So if you want to look for stuff down here, you're going to get some smarts that the world will say, oh, that's really neat. But it will only last for a season and is not eternal. It will last you about this much compared to the eternity and expanse of God. So what is important is Christ. Because Christ was important to the Father and to his God. And he rules. And he's really the ruler here. So the type here in this case, Nebuchadnezzar is the king here, and he rules the physical world that they're in, and even, again, the ruler of the physical world in the sense of that he has to come to the realization that the importance is in the spiritual things. That's where the wisdom is. That's where the nice things are. That's where the important things are. So I just wanted to continue, again, Jason's thought, just with a few things in the same chapter. And let's all realize, especially all of you who are younger than me. So, there's you in the back. It's my son. My daughter's not here. She's teaching the kids. But all of you younger, the young couples, right? A lot of young couples here, that it is important that we focus on Christ, and that we aren't swayed. Other verses, and important that studying in James about being carried about with many doctrines and things that just confuse us with things that aren't important. And we get entangled. Let's not be tangled with the world. Let's not be part of the world. Let's not accept what God has not accepted. And understand what God has before us is for our good, to help us in our betterment. So may the Lord bless his word.